Hey guys, tonight we step quietly into a dusty courtyard somewhere in medieval Persia, where sunlight filters through drifting grains of powdery air and everything moves at the kind of slow, dreamlike pace your brain desperately wishes your Monday mornings had. You stand there blinking, already wondering how people survived working under this heat. Spoiler, you probably wouldn't last an hour. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take your first step deeper into the courtyard, sandals scraping against dry clay. The place smells like a strange blend of warm river water, sun-baked rope, and something very faintly resembling boiled plants, because, well, that's exactly what's happening here. You try not to make a face. A papermaker carrying a bundle of flax stalks glances at you with the weary amusement of someone who's watched countless newcomers realize that papermaking begins with a whole lot of mud-adjacent chores. A mainstream historical fact floats to mind. By the medieval period, Persian papermakers were famous across the Islamic world for refining techniques first brought from China. Scholars, poets, merchants, everyone depended on humble workshops like this one. It's strangely grounding to realize that manuscripts filled with philosophy and astronomy began their lives as piles of stubborn plant fibers sitting in courtyards just like this. You follow a worker to one corner where stacks of mulberry bark and linen rags sit neatly arranged. You reach out and touch a strip of bark. It feels tough, fibrous, and in absolutely no mood to cooperate. A papermaker laughs softly. "Don't worry, it fights all of us the first time." You nod like you totally understood that, even though the bark has already won round one. Nearby, someone dumps a bag of old rags onto a mat. They're pale, frayed, and honestly look like they've been through emotional turmoil. Yet these rags are destined for greatness. Love poems, scientific diagrams, receipts for groceries no one remembers buying. If rags had egos, this would be their redemption arc. A quirky tidbit you overhear. Some papermakers swear that talking kindly to the fibers during soaking helps them soften faster. You're 50% sure this is a real superstition and 50% sure this is what veteran workers tell apprentices for amusement. But then you spot a guy whispering encouragement to a pile of stalks like they're shy dinner guests and decide you're not asking questions. At the center of the courtyard, a small irrigation channel trickles through, adding a soothing water sound that feels like medieval ASMR. A papermaker notices you admiring it and says, "This little canal is older than half the poetry in this town. Historians still argue whether it dates to the Seljuks or earlier." You nod seriously. Medieval people debating irrigation systems sounds adorable, and you quite like it. A tiny dust devil swirls by, just a handful of straw and loose fibers caught in a lazy spin before collapsing dramatically as if embarrassed. No one else reacts. Papermakers seem immune to miniature weather events. You move to another area where two workers split mulberry bark with small knives. Thin strips peel away with soft, crackling sounds. They gossip casually while working. Apparently, a merchant nearby tried selling sacred mountain ink that suspiciously resembled regular ink with crushed nutshells mixed in. His confidence was outstanding. His product quality, less so. A worker gestures for you to try peeling bark. You pick up a strip. The fibers cling together with the enthusiasm of toddlers refusing bedtime. After about 2 seconds, your hand is tired. The worker chuckles. "Takes years to make this look easy." You believe him instantly. You sit on a low bench beside an elderly papermaker who sorts fibers with slow, practiced movements. He speaks without looking at you. The beginning is always the quietest part. Plants don't hurry, neither should we. You're not sure if he's giving life advice or lecturing the fibers, but you let the words sink in anyway. Someone brings out a clay jug of cool water and offers you a cup. It tastes faintly mineral-rich, like it's stored in a container that predates your entire family tree. A worker jokes, "If you faint, we'll use you as a weight for the press later." You laugh, then sip faster, just in case he's only half joking. As the sun slides lower, shadows stretch gently across the courtyard. You begin to notice the rhythm of the place: soft scraping, quiet chatter, occasional splashes, the shuffle of sandals on clay. Nothing here is rushed. Everything feels like it's unfolding at the exact pace it wants to. And somehow, your own breathing slows to match. This is where paper begins, not in a scholar's library or a poet's notebook, but here, between dust and sunlight, where raw fibers wait patiently to become something more. You watch workers carry the sorted materials toward the soaking area, and you follow, feeling as though you're stepping deeper into the calm heart of the craft. In this courtyard, every movement is deliberate, every task unhurried, every fiber at the start of its quiet transformation. And slowly, almost without noticing, you sink into the same peaceful rhythm, one that promises there's much more ahead.
You follow the slow procession of workers into the shaded side of the courtyard, where great clay vats sit half sunk into the ground like sleepy giants. The air shifts here, cooler, damper, and carrying the faint scent of plants in the middle of giving up on their tough personalities. You hear soft splashes, gentle stirring, and the rhythmic thud, thud of wooden mallets. It feels like stepping into a medieval spa day, except the only ones getting pampered are plant fibers, and nobody is wearing cucumber slices on their eyes. A worker motions for you to come closer. He lifts a dripping handful of softened bark from a vat and lets it ooze between his fingers like he's demonstrating medieval slime. "Not ready yet," he mutters, "still stubborn." You watch the fibers slide back into the water, thinking they look like soggy noodles that failed culinary school. This is where the real transformation begins. Soaking, softening, convincing plants to stop being plants and start being future poems about longing, astronomy charts, and extremely dramatic love letters. And if you think the soaking part seems slow, the beating part is even slower. You've committed now. There's no turning back. A mainstream historical fact slips into place. Persian paper makers were famous for improving the beating process, using water-powered hammers in some regions to break fibers more evenly. But in this workshop, you see the older, quieter method. Men and women standing over low stone troughs, raising and dropping wooden mallets again and again. It's rhythmic, hypnotic, like watching a group of very determined drummers who forgot the concept of music. You approach one of the troughs, watching as a paper maker lifts his mallet with serene patience and brings it down on the wet fibers with a soft whoomph. It's not violent. It's almost tender. You try to mimic the motion in your head, but your brain instantly says, "Nope, risks not insured." He pauses to look at you. "You want to try?" Every part of your soul screams no, but your mouth, traitor that it is, asks, "Is it hard?" He grins. "Only if you enjoy having arms." Someone else laughs from across the room, and you decide that admiring from a safe distance is the wiser option. As you watch the soaking bats bubble softly, you hear a quiet debate happening near the corner. Two workers argue about whether winter-soaked fibers create smoother pulp than fibers soaked in the heat of summer. You catch phrases like, "Cool water respects the fibers," and "The sun loosens them, you fool." This segues perfectly into your required scholarly debate moment. Historians still argue whether seasonal temperature really affected the final texture of medieval Persian paper, or if it was simply workshop tradition passed on with stubborn pride. Listening to these two, you're pretty sure the debate is eternal. A young apprentice steps beside you with a bucket, nearly sloshing half of it onto your shoes. He apologizes in the universal newbie panic tone. "First week, I've been wet since sunrise." You sympathize deeply. He points to a vat where fibers swirl like sleepy ghosts. If they're too soft, the master says they'll turn to mush and lose their strength. If they're not soft enough, the sheets tear. He throws his hands up. "Why does everything in life want the exact middle of everything?" You pat his shoulder like you too have struggled with finding balance in literally anything. You drift toward a long table where pulp is being stirred with slow, deliberate movements using wooden paddles. The sound is strangely soothing. Soft stirring, occasional drips, the light plop of bubbles rising and breaking. One paper maker sees you watching and says, "The fibers must float evenly before we can form the sheets." He pushes the paddle through the mixture with the grace as someone who's done it for decades. If the pulp clumps, so will the paper. You peer into the vat. The mixture looks like watery porridge, except somehow less appetizing. You resist the urge to poke it with your finger. A paper maker, without even looking at you, says, "Don't." How he knew what you were thinking is a mystery you'll consider later. A quirky tidbit comes your way when one of the older workers tells you about a workshop legend. Apparently, a famous poet once claimed his best verses came from paper stirred clockwise, and for several years afterwards, apprentices were terrified of stirring in the wrong direction. "Utter nonsense," she adds, stirring confidently counterclockwise, but the superstition was good for keeping them awake. The pulp continues its sleepy rotations as you walk from vat to vat. Each one represents a different stage of coaxing the fibers into readiness. Some are thin and watery, others thicker, almost creamy. You watch as a paper maker scoops pulp with his hand and rubs it between his fingers, evaluating texture like a chef deciding if dough has had enough kneading. His face remains expressionless until he says, "Another hour," and wanders off. You have no idea what he felt, but you pretend you do. It's part of the immersive experience. The courtyard outside glows under the afternoon light, but here in the shade, everything feels slower, cooler. A tiny breeze moves across the surface of the vats, sending gentle ripples across the water. You lean close and watch reflections distort, your face stretching into abstract shapes, your eyes blending with the fiber swirling below. It's oddly calming, like watching a medieval lava lamp. A paper maker beside you chuckles. Stare long enough and you'll start thinking the pulp is staring back at you. You step back, just in case. Another worker approaches with a basket of freshly washed linen scraps. He dumps them into the vat with the heavy sigh of someone who's done this 40,000 times and expects at least 40,000 more. He glances at you. People think paper making is all magic and secrets, but honestly, he shrugs. Most of it is just doing the same thing, the same way, every day until the fibers behave. You nod, and he adds, "Kind of like raising goats, except goats scream more." As the sun drifts toward late afternoon, the workshop takes on a new rhythm, quieter, slower, as the fibers reach their final stages of soaking and beating. The air thickens with the smell of warm water and softened bark. You move between stations, absorbing the peaceful monotony that holds this place together. The apprentice from earlier waves at you, holding up his dripping sleeves. "I'm still wet," he announces. You give him a sympathetic thumbs up. He looks proud anyway. You drift forward with the workers as they begin the next stage, moving from the shaded beating area toward a long wooden platform lined with shallow basins. Sunlight spills across the space in warm, even stripes, as if someone carefully arranged the day just to highlight the tools of the trade. This is where the magic, or more accurately, the extremely patient physical labor, finally starts looking like something you recognize as paper. A papermaker lifts a rectangular wooden frame from a rack and hands it toward you so casually that you flinch, because your brain immediately imagines dropping it in front of 20 unimpressed professionals. You take a tiny step back, hands firmly tucked behind your spine. The frame, called a mold, rests neatly in the worker's grip, paired with a removable wooden border known as the decal. Together, these two simple pieces determine the shape of every sheet. He taps the edge. "This is where the future begins," he says, which sounds dramatic, but honestly, he's not wrong. With the mold and decal, the pulp becomes purpose. Without them, it's just expensive soup. You watch as he carries the mold to a vat of beautifully mixed pulp, pale and smooth like cloudy water. He pauses before dipping it in, giving you a conspiratorial look. "People think this part is easy," he murmurs. "They're wrong, very wrong." You try not to take that personally. The moment the mold dips beneath the surface, everything shifts. The worker lifts it with a steady, practiced pull, water streaming through the fine mesh as a thin layer of fibers settles evenly across it. He gives the frame the lightest shake, left, right, forward, just enough to coax the fibers into a lining. The motion is fluid, hypnotic, almost elegant. It's the medieval equivalent of arranging pixels by hand. You lean closer, mesmerized by how the fibers lock together, forming the beginnings of a sheet even before your mind can fully register the transformation. It's strangely satisfying, like watching a time-lapse of snow settling on the ground, except it's happening in real time, and the snow was a plant 5 hours ago. A mainstream historical fact drifts in. Many Persian papers were famed for their watermarks, subtle designs pressed into the sheet by shaping the mesh beneath the pulp. That's why some old manuscripts reveal faint lions, moons, or floral motifs when held to light. You check the mesh here. No watermark today, but the craftsman tells you they add them for special orders. "Scribes love a fancy sheet," he says with a wink. You follow him to a low table, where he sets the decal aside and flips the newly formed sheet onto a stack of damp felt. The sound is a soft, satisfying thwop, the noise of commitment. Another papermaker covers it with a second piece of felt. Together, the sandwich grows layer by layer, sheet by sheet. The workers move like participants in a calm, centuries-old dance. A small mishap occurs when an apprentice attempts a dip and lifts his mold too quickly, sending a wave of pulp sloshing over the sides. A worker calls out, "Slow! You're not pulling weeds, you're pulling a future book." The apprentice mutters something that sounds like a medieval apology mixed with despair. You pretend you didn't see his soul float out of his body for a split second. While the apprentice recovers, another worker shares a quirky tidbit with you. Some Persian workshops believed a single strain hair falling into the vat could bless or curse a batch of paper, depending on whether the hair belonged to an optimist or a chronic complainer. Superstition, she shrugs, or maybe just a creative way to get apprentices to wear headscarves. You're pretty sure it's the second one. You step beside a master papermaker who invites you to watch more closely. His hands are steady, movements economical, every dip identical in pace and angle. "Consistency," he says. "That's all this job is. If your mind wanders, your sheets whisper it forever." You're 98% sure he didn't mean that in a threatening way. He demonstrates again. Mold in, slow lift, light shake, gentle drain. You find yourself holding your breath through the entire sequence, as if your steady oxygen levels might somehow affect fiber distribution. He notices the tension in your shoulders and chuckles. "Relax," he says. "The pulp knows what it's going. Do you?" You try a very casual shrug, pretending you absolutely do. A heated debate suddenly breaks out near the corner, and you drift over in time to catch phrases like even layer density, uneven sheet edges, and your mold is crooked, not the fibers. Perfect timing for your scholarly debate moment. Historians still argue whether the subtle texture variations in Persian paper were intentional, reflecting aesthetic preferences, or accidental outcomes of hand-formed sheets. Listening to these two argue, you suspect the truth is both, and also someone definitely grabbed a mold after too little sleep. Meanwhile, a gust of warm air drifts through the open courtyard, rustling the felt stacks and carrying the faint scent of pulp and clay. The light catches the damp sheets in a way that makes the fibers glow softly, almost translucently, like pale silk in the making. You feel a strange swell of appreciation. These aren't just sheets, they're potential lives. Some will become merchant ledgers, others poetry collections, others records of who borrowed whose horse. Not all destinies are glamorous, but all are needed.
You move on to another station where a papermaker demonstrates a more advanced technique, slightly tilting the mold after lifting to create smoother edges. Edge control, she says matter-of-factly, or else every scribe who touches the paper will complain for the next 20 years. You nod politely, imagining ancient scribes writing complaint letters in calligraphy. At the far end of the platform, you watch thick droplets fall slowly from a freshly formed sheet. Each one splashes on the clay floor with a quiet pat, marking time in the softest possible way. There's something incredibly relaxing about it. You feel your shoulders lowering, your breaths lengthening. Even your thoughts seem to slow down, matching the rhythm of water falling from fibers. A papermaker notices your dazed expression. "This part does that to people," he says proudly. "It's the calmest stage. After beating the pulp for hours, this feels like letting the world catch its breath." You nod. He's right. Nothing here is rushed. Every dip is deliberate. Every sheet is coaxed, not forced. You stand beside the workers as sheet after sheet takes form, listening to the soft sounds, the dripping water, the faint scrape of frames, the quiet hum of people who long ago surrendered to the gentle pace of their craft. And slowly you realize you've settled into that pace too, softly drifting, quietly observing, fully present. Paper is being born, one thin layer at a time, and you're right here with it. If the first stages of papermaking in Persia feel like wandering through a quiet forest of water vats and gently humming workers, then the pressing and drying rooms are more like drifting into the warm, sunlit portion of a long afternoon. Still calm, still unhurried, but with just enough movement to keep you from fully dozing off. Once a fresh sheet is lifted from the vat, dripping and fragile as a newly formed leaf, the papermaker lays it carefully onto a smooth cloth. Another cloth goes on top of it, then another sheet, then cloth again, like stacking soft blankets and pages in a sleepy rhythm. This alternating pile is called a post, though there's nothing very post-like or structural about it. It's more like a gentle tower of dampness, leaning slightly to the left, threatening absolutely nothing but mild inconvenience. When the pile grows tall enough, two workers guide it beneath the press. Persian presses are not dramatic machines. They don't hiss or clank or groan. Instead, they creak quietly, like an old friend adjusting their chair. The screw mechanism tightens slowly, pressing the layers together with the calm, steady patience of someone determined to flatten their laundry using only good intentions. One of the workers, usually the more experienced one, stands close and listens. He places his ear lightly against the wooden frame to hear the soft crackle of water escaping the fibers. It's not a particularly thrilling sound, just a small, subdued crackling, like distant rain on a tiled roof. In any other setting, it might go entirely unnoticed. But here, in a workshop where time itself seems to move at a drowsy shuffle, even the faintest sound becomes a tiny event. After several turns of the wooden screw, the press has done its part. The papermakers unstack the sheets again, each one now only slightly damp rather than thoroughly soaked. The cloths are peeled away with the same care you might use to separate stuck-together notebooks. The workers lift each sheet, holding it up to the light. Some smile proudly when the fibers look even. Others squint at darker patches and mutter things like, or "a bit clingy today," as if the sheet itself had chosen to be moody. Then comes the drying. Persian drying rooms are wonderfully uneventful places. The walls are lined with wooden boards or sometimes ropes stretched across beams where the sheets are hung like laundry. Sunlight filters in through lattice windows, dust drifting lazily in the warm air. The smell is light, somewhere between fresh grass, wet cotton, and the faintest hint of cooked starch from the sizing pot nearby. Sheets hang in rows like sleepy flags. A slight breeze sometimes flutters them, but never enough to disturb the workers, who move around with the unhurried grace of people who know their craft cannot be rushed. Occasionally, a sheet falls, drifting downward like a very tired snowflake. No one panics. A worker simply picks it up, brushes it gently with the back of their hand, and hangs it again with the kind of casual acceptance that comes from long experience. In this place, mistakes aren't disasters, just tiny pauses in an otherwise peaceful day. When the sheets are finally dry, they transform again. The fibers, once tangled and swollen with water, tighten together. The surface becomes smoother. Some sheets stiffen slightly, others stay flexible. If you stroke them, and the workers often do, not out of necessity but out of instinct, they feel cool, like river stones left in the shade. But the work is far from finished. Persian papermakers are famously devoted to polishing. To them, a sheet is only half alive until it has been burnished, given shine, strength, and a softness that feels almost silky. This step is part craftsmanship, part meditation. A polished stone, often jasper or smooth agate, is held in the hand like a tool that also doubles as a comforting worry stone. A worker places the sheet on a smooth board and begins rubbing in long, slow strokes. There's nothing rushed or forceful about it, just a steady, even pressure, back and forth, back and forth. The sound is rhythmic, soft, almost ocean-like. Many travelers described it as the whispering room, because the workers rarely spoke, and the polished sheets made a faint rustling sound that resembled murmuring. Burnishing could take hours for a single stack of pages, but no one complained. This was the stage where a sheet of paper finally became Persian paper, the kind admired by calligraphers, hugged by poets, and occasionally sniffed by scholars who insisted they could tell the region of origin by scent alone. They were usually wrong, but everyone pretended otherwise. Some burnishers liked to work near a window, letting sunlight guide the shine on the surface. Others preferred the shade, claiming it helped them sense texture. One older craftsman, famous in the bazaar for polishing paper so smooth that ink glided across it like water on marble, believed firmly that a quiet mind created the best finish. If anyone entered his workspace too quickly, he would simply pause, close his eyes, and wait until the air felt calm again before starting his slow, circular motions. By the time polishing finished, the sheets were transformed. What began as soaked plant fibers now looked delicate but strong, flexible but firm, matte yet subtly glowing. Holding one felt a bit like holding soft light, if light had the texture of cotton and the scent of sun-dried cloth. Bundles of finished paper were stacked neatly on shelves to rest, as the papermakers called it. Resting allowed the fibers to settle into their new shape. It also gave the workers time to chat, share tea, or debate the truly important workshop questions, such as, why does one vat produce stubborn pulp while another behaves like an angel? Is it better to burnish in long lines or circular motions? Who misplaced the good stone polisher again? No one ever won these debates, but no one expected to. They were simply part of the slow rhythm of the craft, as essential as the presses and vats themselves. By afternoon, the workshop carried the gentle hum of drying sheets, polishing stones, and workers shifting between tasks with calm familiarity. The air was warm. Shadows stretched slowly across the floor. A few papermakers stepped outside, leaning against the sunlit wall, letting the breeze cool their faces. Inside, others continued their steady burnishing, stone gliding over paper like a lullaby in motion. In this world of patient hands and quiet tools, Persian paper emerged not as a mere product, but as the result of time, care, and an unspoken agreement between people and materials. Move slowly, and everything will turn out just fine.
By the time a stack of newly polished sheets was ready to leave the workshop, the sun had usually shifted to the late afternoon angle, the one that makes shadows softer and colors warmer, as if the whole world were gently lowering its voice. Workers wrapped the sheets in cloth bundles, tied them with thin cords, and set them near the workshop entrance. There they would rest for a short while, almost like travelers gathering their balance before setting off on a long, unhurried journey. Eventually, a trader would arrive. Traders in Persian cities were rarely in a rush. They carried a kind of practiced slowness, the kind that comes from years of bargaining, strolling through bazaars, and sipping tea while discussing absolutely everything except the actual matter at hand. Many of them developed an impressive ability to negotiate while appearing half asleep. A typical trader would step inside, greet the papermakers with warm politeness, and then immediately begin inspecting the bundles. He untied them slowly, as if afraid the knots were fragile creatures. He lifted a sheet to the light, squinting in the way professional squinters do, eyebrows slightly lowered, lips pursed with deliberate thoughtfulness. Then, without warning, he would sigh, a long sound often meant to signal that the papermakers were about to charge far too much. The papermaker would sigh back, equally long, suggesting the trader was about to pay far too little. It was a ritual, more performance than argument. After a few minutes of sighs, thoughtful hums, and gently exasperated remarks, they would settle on a price that both considered slightly disappointing but also perfectly fair. Tradition required it. Once purchased, the paper bundles were placed into carts or strapped onto pack animals. Some traveled only a few streets away to local scribes. Others journeyed days or weeks to distant towns. A few traveled even farther, carried along trade routes that wound like quiet rivers through deserts, mountains, caravanserais, and bustling markets. And so the fame of Persian paper spread, not through loud announcements or bold claims, but through simple use. A scholar in Isfahan praised how effortlessly his pen glided over the surface. A poet in Shiraz claimed the paper's softness made his verses more tender. A merchant in Herat preferred it for contracts because it didn't tear easily. Gradually word drifted along the Silk Road, softly, steadily, like wind carrying the scent of saffron across rooftops. Soon scribes and calligraphers began requesting Persian paper specifically. Many of them liked to run their palms over the smooth surface before writing, not out of any practical need, but because the texture felt calming. Some swore that the paper inspired better handwriting. Others insisted it improved their poetry. At least one scribe in Naishapur claimed it helped him focus so well that he often forgot to eat his midday meal. His friends suspected this had less to do with the paper and more to do with him being naturally forgetful, but no one argued too strongly. In libraries and schools, teachers noticed that Persian sheets held ink more gracefully than cheaper varieties. The lines remained crisp. The edges did not bleed. When stored properly, the pages resisted insects longer. In short, they behaved like well-mannered guests, present, helpful, and unlikely to cause trouble. But perhaps the most interesting part of the paper's journey happened in the bazaars. Persian bazaars were lively places, filled with spice vendors, textile merchants, silversmiths, storytellers, and the occasional goat who wandered in accidentally and caused brief, harmless chaos. In the midst of all this noise, Persian paper offered a curious contrast. While everything else shouted for attention, Persian paper simply existed quietly, inviting people to touch it rather than listen to it. Buyers would pick up a sheet, tilt it toward the light, and run their thumb over the polished surface.
They rarely put it down without murmuring something appreciative. Even those who couldn't afford it liked to examine it, the way some people admire fine fabrics without any intention of buying. It became one of the subtle pleasures of the bazaar, wandering from stall to stall, comparing paper textures, debating thickness, and acting as if sheet inspection were a deeply intellectual task. Over time, certain workshops gained reputations. The rose-scented paper from Kashan, people whispered. The mirror-polished sheets from Tabriz, others said. Some workshops added decorative touches, faint watermarks, golden flecks, or colored edges. But the heart of the craft remained the same: quiet hands, slow processes, and a deep respect for the material. As the paper became more sought after, scribes began to adapt their work to take advantage of it. Ink recipes changed slightly to match the smooth surface. Pens were sharpened differently. Some calligraphers developed new flourishes, knowing the paper would support even the most delicate strokes. The paper and the writing became partners, each enhancing the other. Even everyday people felt its influence. A father might purchase a sheet to write a careful letter to his son studying in another city. A shopkeeper might use it to record accounts for the year. A poet, whether skilled or merely enthusiastic, might attempt a short verse on a single treasured page. And sometimes, someone simply stored a blank sheet in a box, saving it for a moment worthy of its quality. Blank paper has that peculiar magic. It suggests possibility. And Persian paper, especially, held that quiet promise. Caravan routes carried it further still, to India, Anatolia, the Arabian Peninsula, and even parts of East Africa. Traders in distant markets recognized it immediately by touch alone. Some bundles traveled with spice caravans. Others journeyed alongside silk, indigo, walnuts, or medicinal herbs. The paper never bragged about its origins. It simply accompanied whatever goods were moving that season, quietly joining the trade winds. Even centuries later, when travelers wrote about the remarkable smoothness of Persian paper, they described it not as something grand or dramatic, but as something calm, refined, and deeply pleasant. It wasn't famous like a king or feared like an army. It was appreciated, deeply and widely, by people who valued patience, beauty, and the small comforts of a well-made sheet. And so, in a gentle, almost unnoticed way, Persian paper shaped the history of writing, record-keeping, art, and poetry across many regions. It spread knowledge. It preserved ideas. It held poems that made people cry softly at night, and letters that reunited families across deserts. All because in one quiet workshop, papermakers took their time. By the end of the day, as traders disappeared into the dusty horizon and the workshop emptied, a few stray fibers still floated in the air. The papermakers swept the floors, rinsed their tools, and rested their tired hands. Tomorrow they would begin again, soaking, pulping, dipping, pressing, drying, polishing, adding their slow, steady labor to the endless chain that connected plant to page to poem. The fame of Persian paper never arrived overnight. It arrived like everything else in this craft, slowly, patiently, and quietly.
And now, as the last bundles of paper fade into the distance with the slow steps of departing traders, everything around you begins to soften. The courtyard grows quieter, as if even the walls are settling in for the night. The tools are cleaned and stored, the leftover fibers swept into gentle piles, and the air grows cooler with the hush of evening settling across the rooftops. You stand there for a moment longer, letting your breathing fall into that same calm rhythm the papermakers carried all day. The faint scent of mulberry and warm clay lingers, drifting upward like the final notes of a lullaby. Even the distant sounds of the town have grown slower, softer, fading into something almost like a sigh. The workers step out one by one, their sandals brushing lightly against the earth, their voices low and unhurried. It feels as though the whole world is dimming its lights, lowering its shoulders, easing into a long and peaceful exhale. You follow their pace without even thinking about it, your footsteps matching theirs, your body growing loose and warm, your thoughts drifting like those tiny fibers that floated in the workshop air. Somewhere nearby, a candle is lit. Its glow is small but steady, the kind of light that doesn't demand attention, only offers comfort. It flickers gently, painting slow-moving shapes across the courtyard walls, softening every edge it touches. You let your gaze settle on that glow. The day's work is done. The noise has faded. The paper rests. The city rests. And now you let yourself rest too. Your breath deepens. Your shoulders loosen. Your mind quiets. The journey ends in stillness, and you drift with it, slowly, gently, into sleep.